It is the evening of 4 February 1840. You are holding a candle. Outside, the bay at Waitangi is dark and still. Tomorrow, dozens of chiefs will gather to hear a document that will change everything. And tonight, someone has just handed you that document in English and told you to turn it into Maori by morning. You are Henry Williams, missionary, sailor, the man the British think they can trust. And you have one night. What happened in those hours, what words you chose, what words you avoided, what you may or may not have understood, would echo through New Zealand for the next 2 centuries and counting. A 2026 poll found that nearly 4 in 10 New Zealanders believe the Treaty of Waitangi now has too much influence over government decisions, and it all traces back, in part, to the choices made in a candlelit room on a single February night. But here is the twist. The man holding that candle was not quite who history has often described him as, and the document he produced was not quite a translation. It was something far more complicated, something that has never fully been resolved.
Your name before this night is already complicated enough. Born in Norfolk, England, 1792, a sailor who converted to Christianity, trained as a missionary, and arrived in the Bay of Islands in 1823. You learned Te Reo Māori, the Māori language, not from books, but from Ngāpuhi, the great northern iwi, the tribe whose chiefs would sign or refuse to sign the treaty at Waitangi. You could preach in it. You could argue in it. You had already translated the Declaration of Independence, He Whakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga o Nū Te Rini, into Māori in 1835. That matters enormously, because the word you chose back then to describe Māori independence, Rangatiratanga, is the same word at the heart of the treaty debate right now. Set the scene properly. It is not just one man in one room. Your son, Edward, is with you. Edward grew up among the Ngāpuhi people of the north. He speaks the language with a fluency that his father admires. Together, you were working through a draft document prepared by Lieutenant Governor William Hobson and his secretary James Freeman and the British resident James Busby. None of them are lawyers. None of them are fluent in Māori. The historian Paul Moon has described the English draft as resembling earlier British colonial treaties, cobbled together in haste, some of its articles echoing agreements made with West African chiefs decades before. The entire English text had been written and revised across barely 3 days. Mental! The document that would create a nation, drafted in 3 days by non-lawyers, then handed to a missionary and his son to translate overnight. This is how New Zealand was born. But you get to work, and here is where it gets genuinely extraordinary. The English text of Article 1 asks the chiefs of New Zealand to cede, that is, to give up, quote, all the rights and powers of sovereignty. Sovereignty. That is an enormous word in English legal tradition. It means supreme, absolute authority, the right to make law, the right to rule. In 1840, it carries the full weight of British imperial thinking about who owns a territory and who governs it. You sit with that word. You and Edward both know something the British officials apparently do not fully appreciate. There is no existing Māori word for sovereignty, not in that total, absolute sense. The concept simply did not exist in Te Reo Māori in 1840. A language encodes the ideas its speakers have needed. The chiefs of Aotearoa organised power differently, through whakapapa, the genealogical relationships between people and between people in the land, through mana, the spiritual authority and prestige that a rangatira carried and could not simply sign away, through tikanga, the customary law that governed everything. So you make a choice. You write Kawanatanga. Kawanatanga, governorship. It is a word you yourself helped put into Māori usage. It comes from kawana, a transliteration, a borrowed sound, of the English word governor. You had used it in your translation of the Bible. The chiefs knew it. They understood it to mean something like the authority of a governor over settlers, over the unruly Pākehā, European newcomers, who were already causing problems in the north. It did not carry the same weight as sovereignty. It did not mean supreme rule over everyone. Many chiefs who heard it understood they were allowing the British to govern their own people, not handing over everything. You write it anyway, and you certify, in a note to Hobson, that this is, quote, as literal a translation of the Treaty of Waitangi as the idiom of the language will admit of. As literal as the idiom of the language will admit of. That phrase is doing enormous work. Then comes Article 2. The English text promises the chiefs the full, exclusive and undisturbed possession of their lands and estates, forests, fisheries and other properties. In return, they agreed to sell land only to the Crown. Again, you reach for a word. This time you write Tino Rangatiratanga, the full chieftainship, full chiefly authority. The word Rangatiratanga, as scholar Hugh Carvaru would translate it generations later, means something like the unqualified exercise of chieftainship. Here is the problem that historians, lawyers and the Waitangi Tribunal have wrestled with ever since. In the English text, the chiefs cede sovereignty in Article 1. In the Māori text, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the chiefs hand over Kawanatanga, which sounds much closer to governorship, and they retain Tino Rangatiratanga, full chieftainship, in Article 2. Did they cede sovereignty? Or did they agree to share governance while keeping their authority over their own people and lands? Scholar Ruth Ross, in her landmark 1972 analysis, argued the translation had fundamentally altered the meaning, that in choosing Kawanatanga over any stronger term, you had, intentionally or not, created a document that told two different stories. Other historians have pushed back. Paul Moon and Sabi Fenton, writing in the Journal of the Polynesian Society in 2002, argued that far from being a careless translator, you had in fact carefully crafted both versions to make each palatable to both parties, without either side fully noticing the inherent contradictions. That word carefully is the word that haunts the story. Were you protecting Māori? Were you protecting the missionaries' position? Were you protecting the British project? Or were you simply doing the best you could, alone in a room with a candle in one night? Missionary William Colenso, who was present at Waitangi on 5 February, wrote later that he feared some chiefs had, quote, no idea whatsoever as to the purport of the treaty. He raised this concern with Hobson himself. Hobson's response was to say, roughly, that they had done their best and must proceed. Colenso's concern is important. He was one of the CMS Translation Syndicate, the Church Missionary Society team of skilled Māori language scholars, and he was not there on the night you needed him. The two members who might have done the translation with greater linguistic precision, William Williams and Robert Maunsell, were days away from Waitangi. You were the man on the spot. You were the man who had just come back from a long overland journey from Wellington. The timing, as one historian put it, was not fortuitous. And yet, by any measure, what you produced in one night was extraordinary. The Māori text is precise. The concepts, while contested, are rendered in language the chiefs could actually engage with. At the meeting on 5 February, you stood and explained the document to the assembled rangatira, chiefs from across the north. Your mana, your standing among Ngāpuhi was real. Many chiefs who signed that day signed because they trusted you. They trusted the explanation you gave them. Dame Anne Solmond, one of the foremost scholars of the early contact period, has written about the oral dimension of the treaty negotiations as something that mattered as much as or more than the written texts. What you said in that meeting, how you explained Kawanatanga, how you described what the chiefs would retain, that oral exchange shaped the understanding of dozens of men who put their signatures or their marks to Te Tiriti.
You would later travel south. You would collect signatures at Manukau, at Waikato, at the Marlborough Sounds. Your mana and the mana of the document you carried would carry the treaty across much of the country.
But the government that followed was not the government many chiefs had understood they were agreeing to. Land was taken. Wars were fought. The 1877 court decision declared the treaty, quote, a simple nullity. The word Kawanatanga, which Yah had chosen to describe something limited and shared, was used instead to justify something total. The gap between the Māori text and the English text, the gap that opened in that candlelit room on the night of 4 February 1840, has never fully closed. Today, the Waitangi Tribunal, established in 1975 to examine breaches of the treaty, has found repeatedly that Te Tiriti, the Māori text, is the authoritative version, and that it guaranteed Māori Tino Rangatiratanga, full chiefly authority over their lands, people and taonga, their treasured things. The English text, the tribunal has argued, cannot simply override the text that the chiefs actually signed and agreed to in their own language. And this is the debate alive right now. A 2024 Treaty Principles Bill proposed to redefine what the treaty means in law and triggered the largest protest in New Zealand since the 1981 Springbok Tour. At Waitangi in 2025 and again in 2026, the argument over Kawanatanga versus Rangatiratanga, over how much authority the Crown holds and how much Māori retain, remains at the centre of the country's most contested political territory. All of it tracing back to one night, one candle, one man who wrote Kawanatanga, where the English said sovereignty, and Tino Rangatiratanga, where the English said possession. You cannot know, reading this now, whether Henry Williams was a hero or a villain of this story. The scholarship genuinely does not settle it. What you can see is that he was a man caught between worlds, between the British officials who needed the treaty signed quickly, the Māori chiefs who needed to understand what they were agreeing to, and his own belief that British governance, however imperfect, was better than the chaos that unchecked settlement was already bringing. He did the best he could. He may also have done something that changed the meaning of the document in ways he did not fully intend, or ways he intended entirely. The treaty is not a finished document. It is an argument that began on a February night in 1840 and has not ended. Every time a New Zealand court refers to treaty principles, the shared values that sit beneath both texts, it is trying to bridge the gap that opened in that room. Every time a Māori community asserts Tino Rangatiratanga, it is invoking the word chosen that night. Every time a government debates what Kawanatanga actually allows it to do, it is working inside the logic that one tired missionary and his son built in a single night.
You are still living inside the words Henry Williams chose. You may not know his name, but the country you inhabit, its courts, its constitution, its unresolved argument about power and partnership, is shaped by the sentences he wrote before sunrise on the 5th of February 1840. Kia ora. He blew out the candle. The bay was quiet, and the words were already said.